And we'll see the psukim that we're looking at. Awesome. Okay, Shira is the best. She is streaming us. She is everything us. She's making sure we are all in good shape here. I just don't know.
I'm coming. I'm doing it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. Let's get started. Parshas Vayeshev. So again, this week we're gonna a little bit get stuck on the beginning of the parsha, but that's just because there's too much there. There's too much. These parshios are so chock full. It is literally not possible to get through all the different stories and parts that we would love to be able to discuss. Not even if we had a 4-hour shiur or a 10-hour shiur. These are the kinds of parshiot that literally you could spend years on just Parshas Vayeshev. There is just so much here. So what I'd like to focus on today is the relationship between Yosef and his brothers. We'll ask some questions. We have some answers, but we might have more questions than answers. And I'm very curious to hear, very curious to hear what your thoughts are on some of the things that we're going to talk about, because there are a bunch of dynamics here that are complicated. So we all know that this week's Parsha, we really see the difference, the significance in the treatment of Yaakov towards Yosef and his brothers. And the Torah is not shy. This is something we keep talking about, that the Torah is not shy to talk about problems and conflict. The Torah is not shy to talk about families that don't get along. It kind of just levels the playing field. We should all know that every family has its challenges. And certainly for many of us, when we look at Yaakov's family, we feel not so bad about our own everyday squabbles that happen in our own homes with us and our siblings, perhaps, or our children and their siblings. The relationship between Yaakov and his children is incredibly complex. I certainly don't have any insight to share about why things progress in the way that they do, why Yaakov continues to treat Yosef in a special kinds of way that seems to be the cause of a lot of discord between Yosef and his siblings. But what I did notice for the first time that I wanted to just look at with all of you in Parak Lamed Zayin, the beginning of the Parsha. So we're going to stay away from all the things that I'm tempted to talk about, but like I said, if we had 10 hours, we wouldn't get through all of Vayeshev. So I want us just to skim through those first few psukim in the parak. And what we find out in Pasuk Gimel is that Yisrael ahaves Yosef mikol banav. He loved Yosef more than his other children. Kivens kunimhu. Hulo, because he was the child of his old age. Of course, we know that Binyamin is really going to be is really the child of his old age, but that's here clearly referring to Yosef. And I just want to point out one thing, which is that the Torah has done this before, where it's told us that Yaakov has feelings for somebody more than somebody else. Right? When it told us how he feels about Rachel and then Leah, it seems very clear that this is a pattern. And the Mefarshim are very quick to point out that it's not that Yaakov didn't love Leah. He just loved her differently than Rachel. And I think that it's fair to apply that same sentiment to the brothers as well. It's very clear, mikol banav. It's not that he didn't love the other children. He just loved this child in a different type of way. And as we have seen between Avraham and his two sons and Yitzchak and his two sons, this seems to be a pattern that exists within the avos and the imahos, that there is complexity in the relationship. None of them are only children. They all have a sibling, at least. And it does, maybe we might have thought, well, once there are so many children, we won't have this constant, this strife between the siblings. Because I think it's clear when it's two, that has its, it's reasonable to think that one of you could be the favorite over the other. But when there are so many, you might have thought, okay, well, there's so many, so how could he possibly have a favorite? But he does. And there's just this sense of like, oh, can't we get away from this pattern? And in fact, what we'll see in a couple of weeks, God willing, together, is that the first person to break the pattern is Yosef. And that is so deliciously ironic that the son who I think, or the brother that arguably suffers the most as a result of the preferential treatment that he gets from his parents, somehow figures out how to raise his children differently. And he goes back to the original. As far as we know, the Torah tells us he has two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And Ephraim and Manasseh while the Torah doesn't tell us a lot about them, we learn about them more as Shvatim later on. But as individuals, the Torah doesn't tell us a lot. But one of the things that I think is known to many is the fact that the relationship between Ephraim and Manasseh is unlike any other sibling relationship that we've seen in the Torah until this point, right? And that's going all the way back to Cain and Havel, right? We saw Noach's sons had some issues, like all of the families that we have met have had challenges between the siblings. And Yosef is the first one to raise siblings where I don't want to say there's no sibling rivalry, because I think we can acknowledge that's fairly standard and normal, but he's the first one to raise children where the Torah only lets us know how well they do together, where they are our example of Friday night when we, give brachos to our children, that this is how we hope you will grow up. And there's a lot of explanations as to why that is. They were the first, quote unquote, Torah observant or Torah educated, Torah family that were raised outside of the land of Israel. And they stick to their beliefs and they stay as traditional as their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, but also this other piece about there being shalom between siblings, which is unfortunately not something that we have seen up until we meet Ephraim and Manasseh. And, well, I don't want to jump ahead, but just in case we have a winter break when we get to that Parsha, we don't get to study it together. If you remember the story where Yaakov goes to bench Ephraim and Manasseh to give them brachos, and he clearly has a preference, right? Because that is just the way that he relates to the people in his life. He has strong opinions and he's not shy to express them. And he crosses his hands and Yosef tries to correct him like, Dad, this led to a lot of trouble in the past. Maybe you don't want to do that. This is the older, this is the younger. And he says, I know exactly what I'm doing. And somehow, even with that, Ephraim and Manasseh are still viewed as the example, the paradigm of brotherly love, even with that preferential treatment, favoritism thrown in. So it's really something to pay attention to. And of course, we're going to see the opposite of that as we begin in Perek Lamed Zayin. So we see Yisrael, Yaakov loves his son Yosef more than the other children, and he gives him this special gift. And let's just go through these psukim relatively quickly, because I want to just highlight something that I noticed reading through the parsha. So Vayir'u echav ki oto ahev avihem mikol achav. So the brothers see that Oto, meaning Yosef, is the one who's loved mikol achav, from all his brothers. I didn't count, but if you would notice how many times the word echav or achim are mentioned in these psukim, it's astonishing. There's other words they could have used. They are the Bnei Yaakov, the Bnei Yisrael. They could have at some points probably listed names, but that is the refrain. Echav, echav, echav. Vayisneu oto. They hate him. V'lo yachlu dabro l'shalom. They couldn't even find a nice thing to say to him. I want to reserve understanding what the word vayisneu means. Obviously, we all know that it means hatred in general. They hated him, but we have to draw a distinction that I hadn't noticed before. Vayachalom Yosef chalom. Yosef has a dream. Vayaged la'achav, tells his brothers. Vayosifu od snooto. So now they hate him more, right? They hated him, and now they hate him more. I'm going to skip the next few psukim where he recounts his dreams. And of course, again, it's always vayomrulo echav, right? And then at the end of pasuk chet, vayosifu od snooto al chalamotav va'al devarav. Now they hate him for his talking. They hate him for his dreams. It's like they cannot find enough reasons to hate him. We'll continue more. He tells the story over, and then he tells his father in pasuk yud. Vayesaper el aviv ve'el achav. He tells his father and his brothers, because somehow he didn't get the message that when he told them about the first dream that didn't go over well. And he tells them again, Vayigar bo aviv. His father gets very frustrated with him. He yells at him. He chastises him somehow. Vayomer lom, and he says, what is this dream? What are you talking about? Me and your mother? We're going to bow down to you? Yosef, you've taken this too far. And now, for the first time in Pasuk Yud Aleph, we see the word vayikanu bo echav. His brothers were jealous of him. Now, if you would have asked me, without having looked at the psukim any time recently, if I had to describe the relationship between the brothers and Yosef, I would have said they were very jealous of him. Maybe hatred is such a strong word. We have a saying in our house that we reserve hatred for very, very specific things, namely the Nazis, and you'll excuse this is really not so appropriate, but the New York Yankees. That's you're allowed to use the word hate for the New York Yankees in their house. But otherwise, we say, I don't like that. It's not for me. It's not my favorite. Okay, hate is a very strong word. It's very extreme. So even with that extreme word, the Torah does not shy away from using the word, but I would have thought, and maybe this is my lack of understanding in the world of psychology, but I would have thought that jealousy comes before hatred. Like, why did they hate him? They hated him because they were jealous of him. Yeah, that his father treated him better, differently, special, and therefore that made them jealous, and therefore they hated him.
What's interesting, the first time they say jealous is Yaakov didn't hear the dream and say, "Oh yes, we're all going to bow down." He actually
Totally.
rebuffed the dream,
Yes.
and that's when they were jealous.
Yes. Oh, interesting.
You think
And
if he would have said, "Oh yes, we're all going to bow to you," then the brothers would feel jealous. But Yaakov Dafka said, "No, like, what is this? I'm not doing
Right.
that." And then they were jealous.
then they were jealous. Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Which is not expected, because you would think, oh, finally, dad is standing up for all of us. Like,
Right.
maybe then they would feel that they have more of a
Right.
chelek with their father. Yes. Yeah. So that was just something that I noticed, and I don't understand it, but I feel like I need to do some research in emotions, or the development of emotion psychology, because that is counterintuitive. I would have thought that jealousy is the basis for hatred, but the Torah is telling us that they hated him, and then they almost found a reason, and that was that they were also jealous of him. And it's hard. It's hard to tease apart what the difference is, but the Torah is clearly stating that there's a difference. And I think that maybe as we look at ourselves, and hopefully none of us have, a list of people or even one person that we feel so strongly negatively towards. But when we have those people where there is friction, where there is a difficult dynamic, where, okay, maybe we don't want to use the word hatred, but I can't stand that person, maybe it comes up every once in a while. That person really pushes my buttons, really frustrates me. And we might not be ready to admit what the cause is or what might be prompting it. But I think the Torah is giving us some interesting insight, that sometimes we look after the feeling is there, we look to pin it on something, and maybe that's not always the case. Okay, so again, right? His father watched the thing. What does that mean? That he didn't take an active role. After that one statement that he made to his son, what are you talking about? How could you be sharing dreams like this? Your mother and I are not bowing down to you. What is happening here? But that's it. Yaakov doesn't say another word, it seems, according to the Torah. And as we've probably discussed many times, the idea of lishmor means that he was preparing for something, like to be a shomer Shabbos in the language of Rav Heschel, that's often quoted by Rabbi J.J. Schachter. He talks about being a shomer Shabbos is being an Erev Shabbos Jew. It's somebody who's preparing for what's happening. So lishmor doesn't just mean to watch and wait, it means to take an active hand in preparing, so that Yaakov maybe thought he was doing what he was supposed to be doing as far as guiding his children, but the Torah doesn't specify what that might be. So now the brothers go to pasture their father's flock in Shechem. Again, echav, obviously highlighting the fact that this is the most painful sibling relationship that I think, we are introduced to, because this one, more than any other, we're given so much detail, right? Cain and Havel, the Torah leaves out everything. They don't even talk to each other. There's anger, and then that's it. Havel's dead. We don't get the ins and outs of the interactions, but here we get quite a bit. And again, the Torah highlighting for us, achav, his brothers. So the Rashi here is a very famous comment that where did the brothers go? They went to Shechem, but why did they go to Shechem? Shechem, the Mefarshim point out, is very far from where the family was living. I think I saw one commentary that said it was 100 kilometers or something. It is exceptionally far. And Yosef, by most accounts, is 17 years old at this time. And why had the brothers gone so far? There was no place to pasture the sheep anywhere closer to the house. So Rashi here points out, quotes a famous medrash, that they specifically went far away because they were looking to get away from their father. That Yaakov had eyes and ears everywhere, and the farther they went, the more the possibility was that they could enjoy themselves in a way that they couldn't if they stayed in their hometown or even the neighboring town or the neighboring town. And so they are looking to put distance between themselves and their father. And Rashi says they didn't go lirot tatzon, to pasture the flock. They went lirot tatzmam. They went to feed themselves. And the implication there is that they went to engage in types of illicit behavior. That already puts the brothers in a not positive light. And I guess if this was a literature discussion, we'd be talking about the foreshadowing, right? That takes place when you see that the brothers are already up to no good. And I think one of the Mefarshim also quotes, this is an example of Avera Goreres Avera. One sinful act begets another, that once you're already in a bad place and like, well, we already messed this up, so we might as well just like throw the whole thing out, right? Let's just, once we've already eaten something, I already didn't say a bracha and the food is already not kosher. And then, well, I might as well drink and I might as well drink with these people. And then et cetera, one thing leads to the next. And that is obviously an extreme journey that they would be taking, but that's what Chazal say. So whether that is actually what happened or that's the message they're trying to give us, it's significant. And now this is the piece that I want to focus on. So Vayomer Yisrael el Yosef. So he says to his son, to Yosef, Halo achecha, aren't your brothers, ro'im b'Shechem, aren't your brothers pasturing the sheep in Shechem? Lecha ve'eshlachecha alehem. You know what? Come here. I want you to go to them. Which right away makes us think like, okay, what kind of plan is this? Like, what does Yaakov have in mind? And maybe that's what Yosef is thinking. Like, Dad, you want me to travel all of that way to Shechem? Like, you do know they're in Shechem. Oh, you do know they're in Shechem. Okay. And you know how far that is. And let's not forget that Shechem in last week's Parsha, was that last week? I think that was last week, right? Was the site of a horrific incident between Yaakov's children and Shechem and his followers after the kidnapping and rape of Dinah and that very horrific, upsetting story. And maybe I think we would say there's bad vibes in Shechem. And so, yes, it's possible the brothers went there because not only did they not have to worry about Yaakov spying on them, they also know everyone there is afraid of them. Nobody is going to mess with the children of Yaakov in Shechem. That is a safe place for them to be, unfortunately, because they've already shown how powerful they are. So that may have something to do with it. But Yosef knows bad things happen in Shechem. His father was not happy with what his brothers did, even though Yaakov didn't punish the brothers at that moment, or curse them at that moment, really, sort of, kind of. But Yosef clearly is processing that his father wants him to go to Shechem and wants him to check on his brothers. And what I noticed, and you probably all noticed this before, but Yosef's response to his father, Hineni, here I am. Now, this is surprising for a lot of reasons. Number one, the word Hineni has tremendous significance in the Torah, certainly in Sefer Bereshis, but even up through Sefer Shemot when it comes to Moshe. That Hineni is like seen as this statement. There's a reason why Rebbetzin Esther Youngreis, Zichrona Livracha, chose it as the name of her organization, right? Because it is a statement of, I am here, like all in capitals. I am here for my mission. I am here to make progress, to do something, to build something, to be someone. It's like a real powerful statement. We saw it with Akedat Yitzchak, primarily with Avraham, but it comes up in a couple of other places. And as I mentioned with Moshe at the Sneh, when Hashem calls to Moshe. But aside from the fact that it's so significant, it's also, practically speaking, a call to someone. It's when someone calls your name from far away and they can't see you. In other words, it's like someone calls me from another room. I hear them very clearly. They're not so far away, but in order to let them know that I'm listening, when they call my name, I say, oh yeah, I'm here. And that's strange because Yaakov and Yosef are already having a conversation. So they're most likely not calling at each other from across the room. He'd already, like they're speaking to each other. So everyone, the Mefarshim, the Midrashim, everybody notices this. And they explain, oh no, that's because this is not a regular Hineni. This is not I am present in class, because I remember when I was young, that was like, I don't know, it's really not, nobody speaks like that in modern day Hebrew. So I went to the most wonderful schools. I have not one word of complaint. But if you go to Israel today and say Hineni, they will literally ship you right off to Ulpan. So you cannot talk like that there. But when they took attendance in first grade, my Israeli teacher who fought in the IDF, Nora Breitbart, Zichrona Livracha, who was the most outstanding special woman, we had to answer Hineni. Okay, she was training us for a life of mission and purpose. Yes. So Yosef answers, Hineni, Abba, I'm here. I'm ready. And the Mefarshim want to understand, like, ready for what? Does he have any idea what he's going up against or what is coming? Like, is that the statement of come what may, Dad, whatever you tell me, that's what I'm going to do? Perhaps. The Mefarshim point out, number one, that it's Lashon Zrizus. It's a language of enthusiasm. Like, I'm not going to think, I'm just going to do. We spoke about that related to Hanukkah and to the month of what month are we in? Kislev. Thank you. And so it's a language of whatever it's going to be. I'm not cheshboning, as we say, right? I'm not weighing the pros and the cons but like, what should I wear? And what should I pack? And how are they going to treat me? And, oh, Dad, you're sending me with that food. They hate that food. Could you please send me with that? Like, none of that. I'm ready to go. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm willing to do. I wanted to mention what the Ha'emek Davar says, which is just a powerful statement, which is along the lines of what we've been saying, but he says it with so much clarity that Yosef, when he says Hineni, it's b'tzidkaso uvetumo halach, that it is with total righteousness and wholesomeness that he goes. And I think maybe, I don't know for sure that this is what he's trying to say, but I wonder, and he goes on to say that he knew that the journey would be dangerous, but that, as we mentioned before, it was a long distance. Yosef is 17 years old. There was no Waze, never mind. Maybe he had a great sense of direction, but I get anxiety thinking about like going around the corner without Waze. So I cannot imagine what that must have been like. But I wonder if the Ha'emek Davar is sort of hinting towards us, in his righteousness and in his wholesomeness he went. Maybe Yosef went thinking, this is my chance to make things better with my brothers, right? Maybe he went with this sense of, and we're going to see as we read through the rest of the psukim, that he's very brother focused in the same way that the Torah keeps calling them achav, achav. It continues and continues. And we'll see in one particular place where it kind of jumps out at you that he's looking to go after his brothers. Like there is he's doresh shalom a little bit. Like you have this sense that he thinks his father must be sending him because either he knows the brothers are ready to have a conversation with him, or maybe his father is trying to encourage him to build that relationship, whatever it might be, but he's willing to do his father's bidding. And it doesn't matter that it's, that the path ahead is very dangerous. I just want to point out one thing that I saw. Sefaria is really quite amazing. I should give them a plug, and I should definitely donate more money to them than I do, because it pops up all the time, $18 a couple times a year doesn't quite feel sufficient for how often I use Sefaria. But they have uploaded like a tremendous number of commentaries and Sfarim onto their website. And one of them is a commentary known as the Chiba Yetera. And I have to say Yetera because of who wrote it. It was written by Rav Yehuda Herzl Henken, Zichrono Livracha, whose wife, Rabbanit Chana Henken, is the founder of Nishmat. I mean, they really founded it together. Rav Henken, who passed away not long ago, and who was really one of the founders, not just of Torah study, real rigorous Torah study for women, but was a posek and a gadol in his own right. He has his famous tshuvot are actually in Sefaria also, Shut B'nei Banim, I think they're called. And so he happens to have written, I never knew this until Sefaria introduced me to this Parsha, this commentary that he wrote on Tanakh, maybe just on Chumash actually. And he says something totally different from everybody else. And I figured if I saw it, I don't always, get to see so many commentaries, but this one I saw, I just should mention it because he says something totally different from all the other commentaries, which is, and you hear like a little bit of a modern lens to what he's saying, that he's sort of reading it with the same eyes that we might be reading the story with, which is that this Hineni is not actually like any of the other Hinenis. And that the Hineni is sort of like here I am, like, I don't actually want to go. This is actually terrifying. And that he brings proof from one or two other places in Tanakh that Hineni doesn't always mean I'm ready to go on a mission, which is really in direct contradiction to what the Medrash tells us. It's not a Medrash halacha, so he's, you're allowed to challenge. But just fascinating that I think with his modern day eyes and maybe understanding the depth of the pain that Yosef had been in his whole life from not having a relationship with his siblings, not a positive relationship with his siblings, that he was not excited about it. He's going to go anyway, right? And I think that speaks a little bit to the normal nature of a Yosef, the very relatable piece of somebody who knows that there's something that they have to do. They were sent on a mission by their father. It's not an option to say no to your father when he's Yaakov Avinu. I mean, probably shouldn't be an option to say no to our parents regardless, but certainly if he's Yaakov Avinu, then we're going to be more hesitant to say no. And despite that, he goes, right? That in and of itself, I think we're like so, we're so looking to learn from the midos, from the characters of the people we learn from in Tanakh, that we sometimes ascribe to them these like superhuman abilities. Like he was so enthusiastic, even though it was so dangerous, and even though they hated him. And okay, maybe he wasn't so enthusiastic, but he went anyway. And at the end of the day, that is Yosef. And I think that's one midah that we will see as we study Yosef over the next number of weeks, where Yosef is a doer. He doesn't, I think of him very often in terms of like being a survivor almost, right? He goes through a trauma, never mind his childhood, which is very complicated, but then he's lowered into a pit, knows his brothers were willing to kill him, hears them talking, they send him off, and then they send him off to another group of people. He ends up in Egypt, never hears from one member of his family, total trauma. He is left with nothing. As far as he knows, he's dead to his family, or they're dead to him, and he's got nothing. He has to build himself from nothing. Yosef is really, and then we have this beautiful reunion story that some of the survivors were blessed to experience also, but he really is somebody who just doesn't stop moving. He just keeps moving forward, whatever it is. Even when he gets thrown in jail from Potiphar, which is a horrific incident and a horrific story, but the Torah goes ahead and tells us, but Hashem was so good to him. And he continued, he's matzliach. What do you mean he's matzliach? He's in jail. The Torah tells you he's matzliach because he was of the mindset, like wherever I am, that's where I'm supposed to be. I'm just going to keep going.
Dreams are a carrier to his mission.
For sure.
So right away it tells you the purpose.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people have dreams and a lot of people come from very important parents and grandparents who accomplished a lot in their life. And it's very easy to be distracted and dissuaded when you end up on a caravan going down to Egypt by yourself. You're totally alone. And it's true. He is known as a man with tremendous amount of bitachon.
Maybe he was more self-aware.
Maybe it's very possible. He believed in himself. Maybe we know certainly he had a tremendous amount of bitachon. We learn that from the fact that Chazal tell us that he gets punished for asking somebody else to help him, from asking the people in jail to speak up for him to Paro, that he gets held accountable for relying on a human being when he should have just relied on God. Most of us would not be judged that way. It's only because his standard of bitachon and emunah was so great that he gets called to task for that. So that is Yosef. Yosef he just does. He's not aware, like what's going to, pros, cons, what should I do? He just pushes forward. He reminds me so much of that whole generation of people, the immigrant generations, not just survivors of the Holocaust, although obviously that's what comes to mind, but all the generations of immigrants over time who have come with nothing, and just build themselves and don't stop building themselves despite all of the challenges. And they just keep pushing forward. And that is Yosef. So let's just wrap up by looking at the next few psukim, because I think they'll shed a little bit of light on what I mentioned before, as far as what Yosef was thinking was happening. Vayomer lo, his father continues, and this is interesting. At first, Yaakov told Yosef, your brothers are in Shechem, come, I'm going to send you. Once he hears from Yosef that Yosef is willing to go, which almost makes you think, had Yosef said, Dad, are you joking? No, maybe in 5 minutes. That's what they would have said in my house. In 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, I'm going to do it tomorrow. Then maybe he wouldn't have gotten the next level of instruction. Like maybe Yaakov would have backed off. Who knows? I think it's the Radak says, this is where you see that Hashem is pulling all of the strings, because none of this makes sense. It doesn't make sense that Yaakov would want to send his precious, most favorite child on a journey that is very dangerous, to a city that is known to be sinful and dangerous, to the brothers whom he unfortunately knows all too well hate their brother Yosef. Like nothing about this makes sense, right? And nothing about the fact that Yosef agreed with the plan makes sense. The fact that he went, it's like, obviously we could say this in retrospect, but looking back, we say the fact that he went, this is all Hashem pulling the strings to allow for Bnei Yisrael to make their way down to Mitzrayim. And then Yaakov says to him, Lechna, re'eh et shlom achecha, right? Go see how your brothers are doing. But of course, you can't help but notice the word shalom. And again, ve'et shlom hatzon, right? How are the sheep faring? Are they feeling well? Are they doing okay? Is there shalom amongst your brothers? Now, is he saying, are they getting along with each other? Is he saying, how do they get along with you? It's totally unclear. But the fact that Yaakov is clearly putting the word shalom in Yosef's mind is giving us a sense, perhaps, of what he might have had in mind and what maybe Yosef is hearing from the direction from his father. The hashiveni davar, right? And I want you, I don't know, I'm sure I've noticed this before, but unfortunately I don't remember things from year to year. I read those words and I just thought like, oh, v'hashiveni davar, like come back and report to me. He's not sending him on a mission and then expecting him not to come back, which this actually makes me feel better just seeing that phrase. I had heard once many, many years ago, and I don't remember from who, somebody said that it's very possible Yosef thought his father was in on this whole plan. That maybe Yaakov had rethought his treatment of Yosef and he figured, you know what? I've been wrong all along. These dreams, he's too much. He went too far. I'm going to ship him off and let the brothers do away with him in a place that's far away. Nobody will ever hear about it. And we'll move on with 11. We'll be okay. And it like so didn't sit well with me. And I thought, yes, it's possible. It's definitely possible that Yaakov could have Yosef could have wondered, why did my father never try to find me? Like, how come I never heard that Yaakov was not a nobody? He was a famous person. If the child of a famous person were to be known missing or something, like what happened? And he, of course, doesn't know about them telling him, showing him the coat with the blood. Probably couldn't even have thought of that in his wildest dreams that they would come up with a scheme like that. But that phrase really like gives me a little bit of solace, a little bit of comfort that his father says to him, and you're going to come back and tell me how it went. Right? Maybe this is Yaakov being a little less shomeres hadavar. Like maybe now he's taking a more active role. I'm sending you to your brothers, and then you're going to come home and we're going to talk about how it went. Right? How did that interaction go? Did it go the same as it went the last few times you spoke to your brothers? Or are you focused on shalom achacha? Did you go and with shalom in mind? Is that what your goal was? And then, of course, he sends him. And here again, the fact that it mentions where he left from and the fact that he got to Shem, as opposed to just saying like that he arrived, and it says the name of the place again, the Mefarshim also there just keep repeating, see, the Torah wants you to know how far it was. It's like showing you a map and putting the pins in the map and showing, do you see that is a ridiculous amount of a journey for a 17-year-old to go on his own? And then, of course, unfortunately, we know what happens in the rest of the story. Fortunately, unfortunately, I guess we could say it has a happy ending, but it's a painful, painful journey, a painful process. So those were just some of the points that I wanted to look at, to both focus on the complexity of the relationship, of course, between Yaakov and his children, but to maybe look at it from a different angle, that perhaps in sending Yosef, he was really trying to encourage him to improve the situation with his brothers, to focus on repair, on rebuilding, or maybe not rebuilding, but just building a relationship that hadn't been there until this point. The Torah is constantly highlighting for us the word echav, echav, echav. And of course, here towards the end, the word shalom is brought up a number of times, I think, to bring our attention to that. And we saw that while the brothers seemed to, unfortunately, according to Chazal, have been up to no good, they were not going to Shechem for such holy, righteous reasons. We see that Yosef, throughout his approach and how he processes what is going on between him and his brothers and him and his father, he takes a very consistent approach, which is, right, I have to keep moving forward. So my father tells me to do something, even though I don't think it makes sense, even though I think it's dangerous, I'm going to do it. And we saw also, of course, the Nitziv, who had said that all of this was done with like a wholesomeness, a kind of a purity of heart, a righteousness, that he really went with the best of intentions, maybe feeling very hopeful, thinking if dad is sending me, he must think that things are going to work out better this time. So those were just some of the ideas that we saw. And hopefully we'll all get much more out of the Parsha this week, because there is still so much to learn. Okay. Okay, Susan, I hear your question. Susan is asking, was Avram really eager to sacrifice his son? It's a really good comment by Rav Henkin. I definitely hear that. That approach to Hineni is it's literally 180 degrees different from every other approach I've ever read. And he specifically says it's here and with Moshe. I don't remember if there was a third example, that Hineni there is different than all other Hinenis. So Rav Henkin actually seems to have gone out of his way to say that Avram was that eager. You're obviously, free to have your own interpretation and understanding, but he specifically says, you see that Hineni doesn't always mean that. And the exceptions are Yosef and Moshe, because when, as you know, the conversation between Hashem and Moshe at the burning bush, Moshe makes every argument under the sun. It's like, I can't, I have an appointment, I have to go, right? Do not send me to Mitzrayim. I don't speak well. I can't go back there. They want to kill me. He has every reason in the book not to go. He says Hineni, but he doesn't mean it. It's like, I'm here, but I'm trying to like shrink myself. I'm here, but you don't really
You have
see
no
me.
one else.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. If nobody else answers the call, then I guess maybe that's how we love to get volunteers always. Yeah. Okay. Thank you everyone so much. Have a great day. A beautiful Shabbos.